In this video, we rank dictators from worst to best. If you're wondering how the dictators already on the list got their rating, you can check out part 1, but the order in which you watch the parts doesn't really matter. Now, let's get to the tier list.
So, I recently went to Italy, and I'm going to introduce the, I think, only Italian on the list, Benito Mussolini. And I was in Como, and his graveyard is in Lake Como. I was fairly close to his graveyard. Also, I was in Milano, the place where he got hanged publicly, which I think is very based, since you need to be a really fucked up dictator if your people are willing to hang you, as well as I think they hanged his mistress. And he absolutely sucked as a dictator. He invaded countries like Greece, didn't do anything. He participated in World War II, he didn't do anything. And the common Italian struggled a lot with this. So I think that this deserves an A tier, honestly. He was a pretty shit dictator. And I'm also biased, because he tried to escape to Switzerland, but he couldn't do it. He's just this incompetent. He died like 20 miles from Switzerland, I swear. He was just this close and couldn't make it. That's very based.
So my opinion of Mussolini is he's actually an S. He's like that base. And the main reason actually has nothing to do with his dictatorship and all to do with his background. By far, one of the most incompetent people in history for genuinely being a socialist before World War I and ending up the biggest enemy of socialists after World War I. He's a man with zero principle, and I can't stop admiring him. Honestly, his chin is like S tier in my opinion.
Also bald head.
Okay, I'm gonna take the mic from these two, because they really apparently like Mussolini. Oh, basically all I had to say is similar to what Rewriting History had to say, but my view on the rating is quite different. Because I think Mussolini was basically the shadow of Hitler, and everything he did to worsen the life of the regular Italian was basically not caused by him, but his incompetence. I think if Mussolini was competent, he would have actually wanted to improve his country, so I would have to give him a B tier. And the final rating is A. Our next guy on the list is Francisco Franco. Francisco was a pretty cool dictator. He actually had the spirit, he wanted to join World War II, but he was limited by his country, which had undergone a civil war, and I mean, it's Spain. It was pretty shit altogether. So I would have to give him an honorary A tier. He had the spirit of a good dictator. I'm sure if he was actually the dictator of Italy, he would have done more than Mussolini, at least more for himself.
I would also say honorary A tier, because again, he won the civil war. He didn't do anything, like he didn't join the Second World War. He moved the Spanish time zone to the German time zone, and this change stays up till even today, which is very ridiculous. And also, he agreed to reintroduce the Spanish monarchy after he died in 1975, which is very based. He was like, okay, I want to rule Spain until I am alive, and after I die, do whatever you want, which again, is very based. So I think that A tier is good for Francisco Franco.
Yeah, Franco is a pretty cool guy altogether. I mean, I would have hung out with Franco and like maybe smoke a cig, drink a beer. I'm sure he enjoyed that.
Actually, I maybe would drop to B tier, because he banned the Basque language in the Basque country in northern Spain, and I have a big respect for the Basque people, I would say, and he was sort of against them, and maybe the Catalan people. So maybe B tier from me, because just Basque people are cool, dude, like, chill.
I believe rewriting history is being a bit biased.
Yes.
Right now, when ranking the dictators, we must be impartial to whatever sort of biases we have.
Switzerland.
In my opinion, the Basques, as cool as they are and as unique as they are, the treatment of them should be taken into account as a plus, not as a negative. One of the only good things that Franco did as a dictator was to subjugate the Basques. Unfortunately, he just didn't do that much during the Civil War or afterwards, even though a lot of people hate him for reasonable reasons.
Okay, you mentioned that he subjugated the Basque people, but I mean, he didn't even do this. He basically had a policy where if you were heard speaking Basque in public, you would be fined, right? So it's like he didn't imprison them, he didn't do anything, he just fined them with money. That's not enough in your point. He didn't subjugate them, which is like not based, I would say.
I think removing the right of freedom of speech, which is basically what he did, is actually very based. And
He fined them, he didn't imprison them.
Yeah, but this is the slow killing of a language in a way, if you think about it.
rewriting history has a point. A true dictator would have hung them and displayed their heads on the road to Madrid. So, sorry Franco, you're going to see for me. Like, just find them? Bro, like, what are you doing? You're the dictator. You don't just find people.
As the contrarian of the group, I still believe that getting fined for speaking a language is very, very, very based. As unfortunately, this will eventually lead to the death of a language, as the Basque minority has proved to be not doing well.
Well, Franco seems to be very controversial, so I think it's only fair if we put him in a tier of his own. So, we've moved on to the Kingfish. I mean, he was a pretty decent guy. I mean, if every dictator was as good as Huey Long, I think the world would be much better. But I think it's inherent for a dictator to be a dick to his people, and Huey Long did the opposite. He built universities and massively improved the infrastructure in Louisiana, and I can't put him as a great dictator. He has to go in F tier.
I don't know a lot about Huey Long, but I would start off by saying that he isn't a dictator. He just ruled a state, one of 50. Or I mean, at that time, Alaska wasn't a state, Hawaii wasn't a state. So like maybe one of 48 states in the USA. So I don't think that he could really be considered a dictator.
I just wanna add that some of the things he did were largely ignoring or at least looking over the constitution, so he cannot try to be a dictator. At least I'll give him that.
I think that it would make for a very interesting alternate history scenario if he became at least the president of the USA, but there is no way that he becomes a dictator, at least in my opinion. Even if he's a president, like what? He's going to win 2 terms and then what? Unless he's like FDR, who got 4 terms in a row just because of the World War. So I would put him in not a dictator.
In my opinion, Kingfish does not qualify.
Okay, so I think that it's fair to say that Huey Long would be considered as a not a dictator on the tier list. Okay, so we're moving next to Idi Amin, the dude from Uganda. He was absolutely amazing. He was like the king of Scotland or England or something like that. Like he self-proclaimed him this title. He just had some ridiculous titles, like there are maybe 30 words long, and if you didn't address him by his full title, which is like His Majesty the King of Scotland and all African lands and something like that, was his full title except 3 times longer. If you didn't address him with his full title, he would maybe murder you, and that is very based. And he's like, the dude literally looked at himself in the mirror and he's like, yeah, I'm the King of Scotland. That's based. And this is just maybe an A tier because nobody is this delusional on this list. Also, there was a conspiracy where he fed his wife to the alligators, which I think is very based. Which again, just he needs to be an A tier at least. This dude is very good.
I think rewriting history is undermining his achievements. As far as I'm hearing, he's S tier, straight up S tier. And I mean, you can just take that as my rate, because I didn't know much about the guy, but what rewriting history told me just opened my eyes to this guy's greatness.
Idi Amin's genocide was pretty unwarranted, so I honestly have to say he goes up there with people like Pol Pot, honestly. So S tier for him.
Well, you heard it here first, he's an S tier.
Next up we have Tito. He was the Croatian president of Yugoslavia between World War II and the end of the Cold War, and for the most part, he did pretty alright, honestly. Like, as far as dictators who were benevolent go, he was probably one of the more benevolent ones. I would even say that he didn't really intend any harm, even if some of his policies backfired culturally and politically inside the country, especially after his death. Normally, I would say not dictator just for memes, but honestly, I think D is pretty reasonable.
I think we have to give credit to Josep Broz Tito. He was a communist through and through. The mad lad just took all the loans out of the West because he thought the capitalist system would collapse and communism would prevail. He wasn't a great dictator, he didn't do a genocide and everything else, but he was a pretty good leader of Yugoslavia, so at least for that, I would have to give him C.
I think that Josef Broz Tito deserves to be maybe in the B tier, so this is why I'm going to give him an S. so that it would average out to B tier. The reason I'm going to give him an S is that maybe you guys forget that Stalin tried to assassinate him like billions of times, and he just replied, "Stop trying to get people to kill me, because I would just send one and I wouldn't have to send another." So this dude had balls of steel. He just straight up told Stalin, "Don't fuck with me, because I will just kill you." And I think that this is a very ballsy move that you guys just underestimate. Yeah, he was a shit dictator because he did good for the people. He was a Croatian. He united the Croats and the Serbs. That's a shit move. Like, no dictator does this. Just, what a good dictator would do is just, as he was a Croatian, maybe he would kill off all the Serbs. This is a good dictator move. So he wasn't a good dictator, but at least he stood up to Stalin.
So, I think rewriting history has a pretty good point. We have to give Josef Broz Tito at least a B. He had balls of steel that even the man of steel himself couldn't contend with.
Honestly, rewriting history's politics here, trying to change the final score just so he gets the score he actually wants, is very despicable. A very Tito move in my opinion, actually. And so I believe I'm gonna go for the actual non-dictator move, just so he becomes Franco.
So I guess he has to be Franco tier, cause that in the moment is below B tier. So Josef Broz Tito was Franco all along. And I don't know who put Pilsudski here, but I just want to say he's the greatest Polish dude I've ever known, and I don't even live in Poland. So just look at his mustache. I think Pilsudski should run for president of the United States if he was alive. And I would have to put him in not a dictator. He was just a really great guy who, I assume, loved puppies.
I wouldn't necessarily say that Pilsudski was a dictator. He was some sort of a prime minister or something like that. He was very much involved in Polish politics. But in the end, not everything he proposed he had the final word in. So most of the things that he wanted didn't end up happening. For example, the Intermarium. Maybe not a real dictator, maybe a dictator. He did good for his people, which kind of sucks. If you're a dictator, you don't do this. He's a weird one on the list. I wouldn't say that anyone on the list is comparable to Pilsudski, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm missing something, but I would for sure say that he's a D tier.
As an actual hater of Russian people, I love Pilsudski, and I don't believe he's a dictator at all. In fact, Intermedium should be instituted right at this moment, right today. And in a lot of ways, he is the most benevolent of all people here, only because I fully agree with his politics. I'm not biased also, by the way.
Pilsudski is not a dictator. We have Gaddafi, the king of Africa himself. Libya, at a certain point in time, was used to refer to all of Africa, so in a sense, he was the king of Africa. Sadly, he didn't manage to do much, except start a civil war, destroy his country, and ruin his people's chances of a good life, which is a pretty good dictator move, so I would have to put him in A tier.
Honestly, I would agree with A tier. I feel this is kind of reasonable. He wanted to create his own currency, the golden dinar, which wouldn't rely on the United States dollar. The USA didn't like it. This is why they pretty much killed him. Not directly, however. Yeah, he was a respectable dictator. He also was leading the African Union, like head of the African Union. Maybe most of you don't know this. This is a funny information for you guys.
Gaddafi, for all intents and purposes, was a wild one. He didn't really care too much about the people of Libya, seemingly at least, as he fully relied on the natural resources of the country to make his profits. I will say though that he is probably one of the most base terrorist supporters in the history of humanity, as this guy supported both the South African Nelson Mandela Party and the Palestinians and the Irish Republican Army. Now,
didn't he also support Idi Amin? I'm pretty sure that he did, but I'm not sure.
That is actually, I believe so, yes. And also, as far as I remember, communists. And also, he was had a big thing for uniting Africa. So in a lot of ways, Gaddafi was more than what meets the eye. He was a visionary with very ambitious goals that can only be rivaled by a Hoi 4 player, but he had ambitions.
I also want to add, the way he conducted himself is something that all dictators and aspiring dictators can learn from. The man truly exemplified the peak dictator attitude. So, yeah, I think he's a solid A tier.
So next up we have Josef Bronze Tito.
Bronze.
Bronze.
Joseph Gold
Bronze.
Tito.
Bronze.
Joseph Silver Tito. Joseph Zinc Tito. Joseph Broz Tito. Bros.
Bros.
Like, hell
Next
my
up-
bros.